Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. We are back looking at our cardiac cycle diagram, exactly where we left off with our last video. So looking at our diagram from our OpenStax textbook, we've already made lots of notations looking at the cardiac cycle. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time here to fill in a few more details. So let us start with looking at our electrocardiogram. So we left off in our last playlist looking at the electrocardiogram, and we said you're graphing out basically the electrical activity of the heart. And we have this graph with the P wave, the QRS complex, and the T wave. And if you noticed in with this diagram, we're seeing the electrocardiogram graph presented along with the cardiac cycle. So remember that our cardiac cycle, we actually started with the heart relaxed. We started at the very, very earliest stages of ventricular diastole, when we see all of the valves, AV valves and semilunar valves, are closed, right? And we're seeing blood flowing into the atria, but no change of the blood in the ventricles. And notice down here that this is showing the time of our T wave, which is when the ventricles repolarize. Then we talked about, you continue this diastole, so we have all four chambers of the heart under relaxation. This is that passive, that very important passive filling time. And then we start to see our next stage, which is our atrial systole. So this is when we start to get the contraction of the atria. And this is where we're seeing our P wave, which remember is the atrial depolarization. We see the atria contract and then relax, and then we see, moving into the next stage of our cardiac cycle, the ventricles contracting. And this whole period of the ventricular contraction, that's that QRS wave. So remember, the QRS wave is the ventricular depolarization. So here, remember, when we talk about depolarization, we're talking about the change to the actual cardiac muscle cells themselves. Depolarization is talking about the movement of positive ions, so either a sodium ion or a calcium ion moving into the cell, triggering that action potential. When we talk about the ventricular repolarization, we're talking about the exit of potassium, where the charge of the cell is returning back to resting. The other thing that I wanted to point out here is what's described as auscultation, and this is listening to the sounds of the heart. Now, there are 4 different heart sounds, but there's only really 2 that you can hear in a healthy adult. So let's focus on those 2. And if you're curious about the other heart sounds, you can read about those in your OpenStax book. So we're going to see in this area of our cardiac cycle where we're getting our ventricular contraction and we're building the pressure and we're closing those AV valves, we hear our first heart sound, which is described as S1, and this is that lub sound. So if we think about our heart sounds as lub dub, then the AV valves closing would be the S sound, the lub sound. And then as we look through our cardiac cycle, we see the next thing that happens is the ventricle contracts enough to push open the semilunar valves. We get ventricular ejection, which is the movement of the blood out of the heart. And then we see where the ventricles stop contraction and the blood starts to fall like back toward the heart, and that's shutting off those semilunar valves. And the shutting of the semilunar valves is our second healthy heart sound, which is described as S2. And this is what we can think of as the dub. So we have lub dub. Okay, remember there are other heart sounds. There's an S3 and an S4, which can indicate problem with the heart. And so if you're interested in that, go ahead and read about those in your OpenStax textbook. All right, up next, we're going to start talking about cardiac output. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.